In this video I will be changing the thermostat on an M54 engine. This one is in a 2001 BMW X5. So to start out, we are going to remove the radiator shroud. We're going to do that by removing the 3 plastic rivets that hold it on. On yours you'll probably have a air intake snorkel you'll have to take off first, but mine doesn't have that. So after you get the 3 plastic rivets out, you're going to unplug this fan sensor here. And then I just use a 32mm wrench and a pry bar to remove the fan. Keep in mind the fan is reverse thread. So to remove it, you need to turn it clockwise. The pry bar I just kind of place between the bolt and the fan nut to hold the engine from turning, and then I'm able to pop the fan loose. If it's been on there a long time, it might be pretty tight, and when I install the fan I don't go very tight with it. I lift up and remove the fan and the shroud together. So now I move the camera, we're looking right at the front of the engine. This is the thermostat housing. It's got a plug-in on it. I start by unplugging that, and you can see the 10mm bolts that hold on the thermostat housing. There's 2 radiator hoses going to it. There's a wire clip that holds them on. So you pull the clip out, and then you're able to pull the hose off of the thermostat housing. And I didn't drain the coolant on this job, I just let it fall out. You don't lose all the coolant that way. Kind of makes a mess, but if you're just changing the thermostat, it's a good way to do it. My lower hose here was kind of stuck, so I ended up pushing it with a screwdriver, but be careful because these plastic radiator hose ends can be fairly brittle, especially if they haven't been replaced. So it's probably best to just wiggle it off by hand, but I did what I did here, and I knew that there was possibility of breaking things. With the radiator hoses off and the sensor unplugged, next thing I'll do is remove the bolts. There's 3 10mm bolts and 1 13mm bolt. And that 13mm bolt also goes through a bracket that is used for lifting the engine. So you'll have to remove the nut on that bracket as well to loosen it up and get it out of the way. So I'm just going to remove the bolts here and we'll get the thermostat out. So with all 4 bolts out and the nut for that bracket loosened up, we can go ahead and wiggle our thermostat out of there. And you'll see the thermostat, they sell the thermostat with the housing. I think you might be able to buy it separate, but the 3 times I've bought this part for the M54, it's been the whole part. Now I did this job 2 years ago and it's bad again. Now luckily when it's failed on me, it's failed to where it sticks open and you just don't have very good heat because the engine doesn't get that warm. So this time I bought a more expensive, high quality part. The next thing I'm going to do is, you see I pulled the O-ring off. Now I'm going to use my little gasket scraper and make sure the surface is clean for the new one. And then on the new one, I like to grease the O-ring. It's just kind of something I've always done. I like to grease O-rings. They say you're supposed to lube O-rings with whatever fluid they're going to be holding, so you could just, get it wet with some coolant, but I don't like to put O-rings on dry, so I will get this gasket scraped off and lube the O-ring, and we'll put the new thermostat right back onto the engine. So I got it all cleaned up in there, and now I will just carefully install the new thermostat and housing assembly. Like I said, I got the O-ring lubed up. We'll just wiggle it into place here, and we'll get a bolt started so we can start tightening things down as evenly as possible. So after I get it all tightened down, I will plug in the sensor and go ahead and install the hoses. Now the hoses with the wire clip that hold it on, you can push the wire clip back in and then just pull the hose up into place. Here I kind of started it first and then pushed the clip in later because that was the tight fitting one. But with the clip pushed in, and once you get the hose up into place, you can hear it click and you know for sure it's on there. This one I probably should have replaced the O-rings or gotten a new fitting, but it went on there. It just was hard to get on and off, and it doesn't leak now. So here we are from a little bit different view, so you can see things as I put the hoses on there. You can see that engine lifting bracket. I've got the nut on again. So now, I mean, that's about it. We're going back together. The fan and the shroud I put back in together just like I took them out. And you got to be careful on the fan shroud. There's a couple spots on the bottom that have to go into a slot, and then the top is held on by the plastic rivets. So sometimes you'll find these things with the bottom out of place, especially if it's an old used one. It's been apart a bunch, but I'm always pretty careful about getting it on. I usually push it down into place and then get the fan started. I like to use a little anti-seize on the fan because if the threads are rusty, that fan clutch makes it hard. You have to wrench it the whole way off. I like mine to spin freely so that I can just spin it on like you see here. Once it's on all the way, I don't use my pry bar usually to tighten it. I'll just give it a good whack with my hand to tighten it. I don't like to tighten it too much, and that way I'm able to get it off the next time I got to work on this thing. Don't forget to plug in your fan sensor there, and yeah, I mean, there's a little wire that goes into a holder there for the electric fan, and then I'll put my little plastic rivets in, and then we're gonna go ahead and fill it up with coolant. So to start the coolant fill procedure, I'm going to start by taking out this bleeder. It's a plastic cap on the upper radiator hose. And so when you fill the coolant on this, there's the reservoir and then there's that bleeder on the hose. And the reservoir only gets filled halfway up, and this kind of confused me the first few times I did this. But what you do is you take that bleeder out and you fill that reservoir all the way full until coolant comes out of the bleeder hole, and then you know you have coolant through the whole system. And then you put the cap back on the bleeder, and it's going to look overfilled, but once you start it up and run it, it seems to always go to about the perfect level. And then, you know, I always like to run it with the cap off and watch things flow. But that's how you bleed the system. Just fill it up until you see it in the bleeder hole, and then put the cap back on, and you'll see me do that here. You always got to spill a little bit and make a mess with the coolant. Just kind of part of the job. Slimy coolant everywhere. That's why, you know, at the beginning when I didn't drain it, just make sure you get coolant all over the garage floor, front of the engine and everything. Just part of the fun of working on these things. And there it is. You'll see the coolant in the bleeder hole there. So now she's full, and I'll put the cap on. Careful not to tighten this too much because it's plastic. It'd be pretty easy to strip out. So that's it. We got a new thermostat. We're blowing good heat. That's all there is to it. Thanks for watching.